My name is Mara Ellison. I am 39 years old, and the photograph that ended my marriage arrived while I was standing in the laundry room, folding my husband's white shirts into neat, useless squares. It came from my younger sister, Tessa. At first, I thought she had sent another picture of the flowers she'd been arranging for a client, or one of the glossy meals she liked to post when she wanted people to believe her life was more graceful than it was. Instead, I opened the message and saw my husband sitting in a private hospital room with two newborn babies tucked against his chest. His face was wet with tears. The caption under the picture said, "Daddy finally got his miracle boys." For several seconds, the world became strangely quiet. The dryer was still turning behind me. A button tapped the metal drum with a small, steady click. The late afternoon sun was coming through the window over the utility sink. Everything ordinary kept happening, while 8 years of marriage split open in my hand. Bennett had told me he was in Raleigh for a freight conference. Tessa had told me she was staying with a friend for the last few weeks of her pregnancy because she needed peace. Neither of them had told me the father of her twins was supposed to be my husband. I did not scream. I did not throw the phone. I did not call either of them. I zoomed in. That is what I do when something does not make sense. I look closer. I work as a forensic insurance accountant in Charlotte, North Carolina. My job is to examine loss claims, business interruption reports, and financial records, after people insist that the numbers prove one thing when the records suggest something else. I am paid to notice dates, receipts, signatures, missing pages, and tiny inconsistencies that dishonest people trust emotion to hide. I had spent years using that skill for strangers. I had never expected to use it on my husband and my sister. In the picture, Bennett was wearing the navy sweatshirt I bought him after our second failed round of fertility treatment. Tessa's reflection was visible in the window behind him. She was holding the phone, smiling like a woman who had finally won something she had always believed should belong to her. One baby wore a blue cap. The other wore a green one. On the bassinet card near Bennett's elbow, I could read the first name clearly. Rowan. My chest tightened so hard I almost sat down on the floor. Rowan was not a family name. It was not a name Tessa had ever loved. It was the name I had written in a private journal after my second miscarriage. The name Bennett and I whispered once in bed when we were still foolish enough to believe whispering could protect hope. Tessa had not only taken my husband, she had taken the name of the child I had buried inside myself. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from Tessa. "Wrong person. Please don't freak out." We were going to explain. I stared at those words until they blurred. Then I did the only thing I trusted myself to do. I forwarded the photograph to a private email account, saved it in 3 places, and opened my laptop. Before I tell you what Bennett's mother revealed and why it destroyed the story both of them were telling, tell me where you are watching from tonight and what the weather is like there. I want to know how far this story travels, because someone watching may be carrying blame that was never theirs to carry. Bennett Ward and I had been married for 8 years. He was 42, handsome in an easy, reliable way that made people trust him before he earned it. He co-owned a regional freight brokerage called Ward Pierce Logistics with his college friend, Owen Pierce. Bennett handled clients and public relationships. Owen handled operations and money. Together, they had built a company that moved medical supplies, restaurant equipment, and specialty manufacturing parts across the Southeast. When we met, Bennett was still driving his own box truck twice a week because the company could not afford another driver. He had a laugh that filled every room and a habit of tapping 2 fingers against a table whenever he was thinking through a problem. I loved him for the way he made ambition sound like a shared language. He loved me, or I believed he did, because I was steady, careful, and good at finding the floor under panic. We started trying for a baby in our 2nd year of marriage. At first, it was light. We joked about names, counted months casually, let ourselves imagine a nursery before there was any reason to paint one. Then came the appointments. Then the tests. Then the injections, calendars, acronyms, procedures, waiting rooms. and the kind of grief that arrives so often you begin setting a place for it. I lost 4 pregnancies. The first was so early, people told me not to call it a real loss, which taught me that some people think grief needs paperwork before it deserves respect. The second had a heartbeat for 9 days. The third made it to 10 weeks and left me afraid of my own body. The fourth happened while Bennett was supposedly in Savannah, closing a client account. I was alone in an emergency room at 2:18 in the morning when a nurse with tired eyes held my hand because my husband was not answering his phone. He came home the next afternoon with flowers from a grocery store and said he had been in a dead zone. I believed him because the alternative was too cruel to admit. Through all of it, Tessa was there. She brought soup after procedures. She sat beside me when Bennett had meetings. She told me I was the strongest woman she knew. She said she could never survive what I survived. I did not understand then that some compliments are just envy wearing soft clothing. Tessa was 35, 4 years younger than me, and had spent most of her adult life floating from one bright plan to another. Floral design, event styling, personal branding, a candle line, a home organizing page. Each venture began with professional photographs and ended when invoices, taxes, or disappointed clients required more discipline than performance. Our parents called her creative. They called me rigid. When Bennett and I began fertility treatment, Tessa became fascinated by the process. She wanted to know what medications I was taking, how many embryos we had, what names we liked, what the doctor said. I thought she was trying to understand my life. I did not realize she was studying the shape of it. After the photo arrived, I did not confront them because confrontation helps liars edit. Instead, I started with money. Bennett and I kept separate personal accounts, but shared a household account, a savings account for treatment expenses, and one credit card for travel, insurance, and home repairs. I had access to all statements going back years. The first charge I found was from a boutique birthing center in Durham. $6,870. It had been coded as equipment deposit through Ward Pierce Logistics and reimbursed from our household account under a category Bennett had labeled client hospitality. The second charge was for a furnished apartment near Tessa's studio. $3,200 a month for 5 months. Bennett had told me the payments were for a temporary warehouse consultant. The third charge made my hands go cold. $18,450 paid to a private maternity concierge service from the account we had called the Rowan Fund. That was not its official name. It was simply the savings account Bennett and I had created after our second loss, when we decided to set aside money for one final attempt, one final possibility, one final piece of hope. He had used money I saved for our treatment to prepare for my sister's twins. I pulled every statement. I cross-referenced payment dates against Bennett's calendar, Tessa's social media posts, toll transponders, fuel purchases, and the location data from a tablet Bennett had forgotten was still connected to our family account. The pattern was not a slip. It was a second life. Hotel stays on nights he told me he was meeting carriers. Pharmacy charges from a town near Tessa's apartment. Transfers to Owen Pierce labeled Bridge Advance. Then identical amounts leaving Owen's business account to a company Tessa had created called Lowell Creative Wellness. Lowell was our mother's maiden name. I sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, building the file the same way I built every professional fraud report. Date, amount, source, explanation given, explanation supported by evidence, gap, risk, impact. At 7:12 in the morning, Bennett texted me, "Conference running long. Miss you. Back tomorrow." I looked at the message, then at the photograph of him holding newborn twins in a hospital room less than 3 hours away. For the first time in my marriage, I felt no urge to reply. At 8 o'clock, I called a divorce attorney named Lenora Shaw. By noon, I was sitting across from her in a glass-walled office overlooking Tryon Street with my evidence on a flash drive and my wedding ring turned inward on my finger. Lenora was in her early 50s, with silver at her temples and a voice that could make a threat sound like an invoice. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question. Does he know you know? No. Good, let's keep it that way for a little while. We filed quietly 3 days later. I did not move out. I did not scream at Bennett when he came home pretending to be exhausted from a conference. I kissed my sister's cheek when she called crying and asked whether I hated her. I told her I needed time. She mistook that for weakness. People often confuse composure with surrender because they cannot imagine silence being used for anything other than fear. Bennett slept beside me that night like a man who believed he had survived the worst of discovery because no plates had broken. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe and thinking about the fact that I had apologized to him after every loss. I had said, "I'm sorry my body keeps failing us." He had kissed my forehead and let me believe that sentence was true. 3 days after the divorce petition was prepared, but before service, Bennett's mother called me. Ruth Ward rarely called after 8 p.m. She was 67, a retired maternity nurse with neat handwriting, sharp instincts, and a talent for making people feel seen without making them feel examined. Ruth and I had always been close in a careful way. She never inserted herself into our marriage, but she checked on me after every procedure when my own mother said things like, "Try not to obsess. Stress makes it worse." When I answered, Ruth did not say hello. "Mara," she whispered, "do not confront Bennett yet." I stood in the hallway outside the guest room, my hand tightening around the phone. "What do you know?" She began crying. Not loud, not dramatic. Ruth cried like someone whose body had finally reached the end of holding itself upright. "I know about the babies," she said. "He brought them here tonight. Tessa was with him. He said I was finally a grandmother." I closed my eyes. "And?" Ruth took a breath that shook. And I went pale because Tessa looked me in the eye like she expected me to celebrate a miracle I knew could not be what they were calling it. I did not speak. Then Ruth said the words that changed every piece of the story. "She didn't tell him, Mara. She didn't tell him those boys cannot be his." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. "Ruth, what are you saying?" "I am saying I should have told you 8 years ago." We met the next morning in the back booth of a diner near Lake Norman, a place far enough from both our neighborhoods that no one would recognize us. Ruth arrived with a black folder pressed flat against her chest. She looked as if she had aged 5 years in one night. Before she opened the folder, she told me a story. When Bennett was 16, he had been injured in a football accident that led to surgery and complications nobody discussed outside the family. At the time, doctors told Ruth there could be long-term fertility issues. Bennett was a teenager, furious, embarrassed, and determined never to talk about it again. Years later, when Bennett and I began treatment, Ruth assumed the doctors would test both of us and tell us whatever we needed to know. "They did test him," she said. Her voice broke. "The first year you were trying, Bennett asked me to stop by the clinic and pick up a packet because he was stuck on a job site. I was still listed as an emergency contact from an old form. The receptionist handed me an envelope with his name. I should have taken it straight to him. But you opened it." Ruth nodded. The report showed a severe male factor finding. Not low, not borderline, severe. Dr. Helena Marks had recommended a urologic consult, counseling, and a conversation with me before we continued further treatment. Ruth panicked. She told herself Bennett would fall apart. She told herself she would give it to him after dinner, then after the weekend, then after she found the right words. She never did. "I hid it," she said. And then every month that passed made telling the truth harder, because then I would also have to confess how long I had let you blame yourself. My hand trembled under the table. Did Bennett ever see it? I don't know, not that report. But I know Dr. Marks asked him to come back twice, and he refused. I know because the office called my number when they could not reach him. I told myself it was his choice then. I told myself I had no right to interfere. You had every right to stop me from apologizing for something that wasn't mine. Ruth flinched, but she did not defend herself. I know. That mattered, though it did not heal anything. She opened the folder. Inside were copies of the old report, a handwritten note from Ruth dated 8 years earlier, and an envelope from Dr. Marks's former clinic. There were also 2 newer pages that made no immediate sense to me. Ruth explained that after Bennett brought the twins to her house, after she said they could not be his, Tessa became frantic. Bennett accused Ruth of being cruel. Tessa said medical reports were wrong all the time. Then Ruth noticed something strange. One twin's hospital bracelet listed a blood type that did not fit the combination Tessa claimed. Ruth had been a maternity nurse for 31 years. She knew when to stop guessing. "I asked Tessa who the donor was," Ruth said. "The donor?" She froze. Bennett did not. That told me he did not know. Then she said there was no donor and began packing the babies. Bennett followed her outside. He called me from the driveway yelling. But before they left, one of the babies dropped a discharge instruction page from the diaper bag. Ruth slid the page toward me. It listed Tessa Ellison as mother, no father on one form, Bennett Ward on another, and a prenatal contact named Owen Pierce. Bennett's business partner. My stomach turned. The twins had not come from nowhere. They had come from a lie inside another lie. Ruth reached across the table and took my hand. "Mara, I cannot undo what I kept from you, but I am done protecting my son from the consequences of what he has done." That was the first time I cried. Not because Bennett had betrayed me. That grief had already hardened into something clean. I cried because, for 8 years, my body had been a crime scene everyone kept revisiting, and now the evidence showed I had been standing in the wrong room all along. Lenora read Ruth's folder twice. Then she removed her glasses and said, "This changes the divorce. It also changes the money." Over the next 2 weeks, while Bennett tried to convince me we could still separate respectfully, Lenora and I moved quickly. We requested temporary financial restraints. We traced marital funds used for Tessa's pregnancy and living expenses. We sent preservation notices to Ward Pierce Logistics, Owen Pierce, Tessa's company, the birth center, and Bennett's attorney. Bennett received the divorce papers on a Monday morning at his office. He called me 14 times in 20 minutes. I did not answer. Then Tessa called. I answered her. "Mara," she sobbed, "please don't do this. The twins are innocent." "Then you should not have built their first days around stolen money and a stolen name." She went silent. "You noticed Rowan." "I noticed everything." Her voice changed. The crying stopped like someone had closed a door. "You always think you're better than me because you have files and spreadsheets. You don't know what it feels like to be invisible beside you." I almost laughed. "Tessa, you had our parents making excuses for you since you were 6. You had my husband holding your babies. You had my savings paying for your apartment. If that is invisible, I would hate to see what being seen costs," she whispered. "Bennett loves them." "Does Bennett know Owen is listed on the prenatal paperwork?" The silence told me enough. Then she hung up. That same night, Bennett came to the house. I had already changed the alarm code, but I opened the door because I wanted to look at him when he realized the old version of me was gone. He stood on the porch in a charcoal coat, pale and unshaven, holding a folder Ruth must have given him or he must have taken from her. Rain was coming down behind him in thin silver lines. "You knew about the report," he said. "I know now. My mother hid it from me. She hid it from both of us." His jaw tightened. "That means everything that happened after." "No." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You do not get to make your mother's secret the birthplace of your affair. You made choices before you knew about the file. You lied to me. You slept with my sister. You used our treatment savings to support her pregnancy. You let me apologize for losses you never had the courage to understand." He looked wounded, as if the order of my sentences hurt him more than the facts. "I thought they were mine. You wanted them to be yours so badly that you stopped asking whether anything around them was true." His face changed then. The anger slipped, and under it was something frightened. "What do you know about Owen?" I held his stare. "Enough." Bennett sat down on the porch step as if his legs had given out. For years, I had imagined what it would be like to see him broken. It did not feel powerful. It felt like watching a house collapse after I'd already moved my valuables out. He told me Tessa had said the pregnancy was a miracle. She had claimed she and Bennett had conceived during a weekend in Asheville, a weekend when I was recovering from a procedure, and believed Bennett was taking time to think about our future. When she found out she was carrying twins, she told him the universe had given him what he deserved. She asked him not to tell me until after the babies were born because she feared stress would hurt them. He believed her because believing her allowed him to be a father without admitting what kind of husband he had become. I listened until he finished. Then I said, "The divorce continues. Mara, if they aren't mine, they are not mine either. And yet my money paid for them." He buried his face in his hands. For one dangerous second, the part of me that had spent 8 years caring for him wanted to reach out. I did not. Compassion does not require you to walk back into a burning house. The first hearing happened 19 days later. Bennett's attorney tried to frame the situation as a marriage broken by grief, infertility, family confusion, and emotional decisions. Lenora let him speak until he ran out of soft words. Then she placed the records on the table. The photo, the hospital forms, the transfer history from the Rowan fund, the apartment lease, the birth center invoices, the payments routed through Owen's business account, the old fertility report, Ruth's affidavit acknowledging what she had hidden, Dr. Marks's letter confirming the results and explaining that I had never been informed. The judge was not interested in drama. Judges rarely are. They are interested in documentation. Documentation was where Bennett and Tessa had been most careless. By the end of that hearing, the court ordered preservation of financial records, temporary exclusive use of the marital home to me, and a forensic review of funds diverted during the marriage. Bennett agreed to a legal paternity test under pressure from his own attorney, though I could see he already knew what the result would say. Tessa refused at first. She said the baby's privacy was being violated. Lenora responded by asking why Tessa had no concern for privacy when she sent a photograph of my husband holding them to the wife whose money paid for the room. Tessa's lawyer told her to be quiet. 2 weeks later, the paternity results arrived. Bennett was not the father. Owen Pierce was. That should have been the final twist. It was not. The deeper review of Ward Pierce logistics revealed that Owen had not only been sleeping with my sister, he had used Bennett's longing for fatherhood to move money out of the company. Several payments Bennett believed were going toward Tessa's medical bills had been split, rerouted, and partially deposited into accounts controlled by Owen. The apartment lease had been negotiated by Owen. The concierge service had been charged to a company card. The pregnancy support payments Bennett sent to Tessa were often forwarded to Lowell Creative Wellness, then used to pay Owen's personal credit card and a down payment on a boat. Bennett had destroyed his marriage to become a father. Owen had used that dream as a laundering system. The day Lenora's investigator explained that to us, Bennett looked at me across the conference table, like he expected shared outrage to create some temporary alliance between us. I did not give him one. Do not look at me like I am supposed to hold your hand through discovering that your affair partner and your business partner lied to you better than you lied to me. He looked away. Ruth was in the room that day because she had agreed to testify if needed. She had not asked me for forgiveness again. She simply kept showing up with whatever records she could find. After the investigator left, Ruth turned to Bennett. "You let Mara carry your shame for years, even when you did not know the truth. You enjoyed being the wounded husband because it made you the center of every room. I raised you to be better than that." Bennett's eyes filled. "Mom, please." "No," she said. "I said please to myself for too long." That was the moment I understood Ruth's exposure was not one confession. It was a decision to stop editing the truth for the comfort of her son. The public collapse came from Tessa. She had always been better at performance than endurance. As soon as Owen's name entered the legal record, his wife found out. Owen had been married for 11 years to a woman named Celia who owned 18% of Ward Pierce Logistics, through a family investment made when the company was young. Celia did not cry in public. She filed. Within days, Owen was facing divorce, a shareholder dispute, breach of fiduciary duty claims, and a demand for repayment of funds misused through company accounts. Bennett's company froze distributions. Their biggest medical supply client suspended a renewal contract pending review. The freight brokerage Bennett had spent years building began coming apart because two men had mistaken private betrayal for private risk. But Tessa still believed she could control the family story. She invited our parents, Ruth, Bennett, and me, to what she called a healing dinner at our parents' house. I almost refused. Lenora advised me not to go alone. I brought her. Tessa hated that. She had arranged the dining room like a tribunal, with our mother crying before anyone said a word, and our father pacing as if he were about to deliver judgment. Bennett sat near the far wall, hollow-eyed. Ruth sat beside me, hands folded. Lenora stood behind my chair with a legal pad and a face that made even my father lower his voice. Tessa began by saying she understood that mistakes had been made. I asked her to name one. She said, "I fell in love with the wrong person." I looked at Bennett. "Which one?" The room went silent. Tessa flushed. "That was cruel." "No. Cruel was naming your son Rowan after the baby name you read in my journal." Our mother gasped. Tessa's eyes flickered toward the hallway. "That name was beautiful. It was not yours. I was trying to honor what you lost. You were trying to decorate what you stole." My father snapped at me not to talk to my sister like that. Lenora asked calmly whether he wanted to be added to the witness list, since he seemed to have information about the situation. He sat down. Then Ruth spoke. She placed the old medical report on the table, along with her written affidavit. "I kept this from Mara and Bennett for 8 years, she said. "That was wrong. I will live with that." But Tessa knew enough to know Bennett's paternity was uncertain. Tessa stood so quickly, her chair struck the wall. "That is not true." Ruth removed another page from her folder. It was a phone record. "Tessa called me 7 months ago. She asked whether Bennett had ever had fertility problems. I told her that if she was pregnant and there was any uncertainty, she needed to speak to a doctor and tell Bennett the truth. She said truth was flexible when a man wanted something badly enough." Bennett looked up slowly. Tessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Twist number 1 had been the old medical report. Twist number 2 had been Owen. Twist number 3 was sitting in Ruth's neat handwriting on a page that turned my sister's fear into motive. She had known the paternity was uncertain before the twins were born. She had chosen the story that gave her the most money, the most sympathy, and the sharpest weapon against me. My mother began crying harder. "Why would you do this to your sister?" Tessa turned on her. "Because she always had everything." I actually laughed then, not loudly, just once. I had surgeries, losses, a husband who lied, a sister who slept with him, and a family that told me to be understanding. "Which part looked like everything to you?" She pointed at me. "You had respect. You had a career. You had Bennett first. You had people treating you like you mattered without having to beg." For the first time, I saw the real engine behind her cruelty. It had never been love for Bennett. It had been resentment toward me. Some people do not want your life because it is better. They want it because they cannot stand that you survived yours with dignity. Bennett stood. "Tessa, did you know Owen could be the father?" She looked at him, and for 1 second, I thought she might tell the truth. Then she said, "I knew you would be the better father." That answer destroyed whatever remained of his fantasy. Bennett left before dessert. Ruth followed him to the porch, not to comfort him, but to make sure he did not drive drunk. I stayed long enough to deliver one final envelope to my parents. It contained copies of the money trail involving the $76,400 from my treatment savings, the $41,000 in apartment payments, and the $22,800 in services disguised as business expenses. My mother whispered, "Mara, surely you do not need all of it back." I said, "That is the difference between us. You are worried about what I need. I am focused on what was taken." Our father tried to say, "Family should not do this to family." Lenora looked at him and said, "Family did this already. My client is documenting it." That ended the dinner. After that night, the family divided itself with remarkable speed. My parents said they were heartbroken for everyone, but their heartbreak kept leaning toward Tessa. They said she was postpartum. They said she was overwhelmed. They said Bennett was a grown man and had made his own choices. They said Owen was probably the real villain because he had money and experience. They said anything except the sentence I needed them to say. Tessa chose this. I stopped answering after the fourth call. My mother left a voicemail telling me I would regret being so cold when the boys got older, and asked why their aunt hated them. I saved it for Lenora, not because I wanted to use it, but because I had learned that people who rewrite stories often begin with small emotional threats. 2 days later, Tessa posted a photograph of the twins' hands wrapped around her finger. The caption read, "Some women become mothers through love. Others become bitter watching it happen." She did not name me. She did not need to. By noon, several relatives had liked the post. 2 family friends sent me careful messages reminding me that babies were blessings. A cousin I had not seen in 5 years wrote that my anger might poison the children if I was not careful. I responded to exactly one person. I sent my cousin a copy of the hospital invoice paid from my treatment savings and asked whether she wanted to cover Tessa's next legal bill in the spirit of family. She never wrote back. Lenora advised me not to engage online. I did not. Instead, we filed a motion documenting harassment and public statements that could affect the divorce and financial claims. Tessa deleted the post within 24 hours after her attorney received notice. That was when her performance became private again, and private cruelty is often more revealing. She sent me a voice message at 1:06 a.m. "You think you won because Bennett is confused right now? But he wanted a family more than he ever wanted you. I gave him what you couldn't. Even if the test says Owen is the father, Bennett loved them first. That's what matters. I played it once. Then I saved it." A week later, the court-appointed financial examiner issued a preliminary report. The total funds connected to the affair and pregnancy were higher than I had found on my own. Bennett had authorized $121,300 in payments, reimbursements, and advances connected to Tessa over 14 months. Of that, at least $58,000 had passed through Owen-controlled accounts. $31,600 came directly from marital funds. $44,900 came from company accounts that Bennett had authority to use, but not for personal purposes. The rest came from a line of credit Bennett had opened using our house as partial collateral. That last piece stopped me. I had not signed any new home equity paperwork. Lenora requested the file from the lender. The signature looked like mine from a distance. The letters were slightly too rounded, the slope slightly too sharp. I knew immediately who had done it, not because Tessa was good at forging, but because she had once copied my handwriting in high school to get out of a detention. I was 16 then. She was 12. Our mother had called it clever. Now clever had become a felony-shaped problem. The notary on the loan package worked at Owen's bank. When confronted, she admitted she had notarized the document without me present, because Owen assured her it was a routine spousal consent form, and because Bennett had been a valued client. She lost her commission before the divorce was final. The lender froze the line and opened a fraud review. Bennett claimed he did not know my signature had been forged. For once, I believed him. That did not make him innocent. It made him reckless enough to let other people commit crimes around him because he wanted the result. The fourth twist was not emotional. It was structural. My sister, my husband, and his business partner had not merely betrayed me. They had built a financial machine around my silence. The machine broke because Tessa sent one photo to the wrong person. People think revenge begins with anger. In my case, it began with a screenshot. The divorce mediation was scheduled for a Thursday in late March. By then, the magnolia trees in Charlotte were beginning to bloom. which felt almost insulting. The world should not look beautiful on days when you are dividing the remains of a life. Bennett arrived with his attorney, and a face that looked like sleep had become theoretical. Tessa was not part of the divorce mediation, but her lawyer joined by video because her claims against Owen and potential obligations to reimburse funds were tangled through our case. Owen did not appear. His attorney appeared in a suit too expensive for the amount of trouble he was in. Ruth sat outside in the hallway because she had agreed to be available if needed. She brought knitting, though I never saw her make a single stitch. The mediator began with property. The house had appreciated significantly since Bennett and I bought it. Under normal circumstances, he would have had a strong claim to half the equity. These were not normal circumstances. Lenora argued that the forged home equity documents, diverted marital funds, and concealment warranted an unequal distribution. Bennett's attorney countered that Bennett had also been deceived regarding paternity and should not be punished for all money routed through Owen. Lenora folded her hands. My client is not seeking damages because Mr. Ward was embarrassed. She is seeking restoration of funds taken from the marriage and used to support an affair with her sister and a pregnancy falsely represented to him as his biological children. The mediator looked tired already. Then we moved to the Rowan Fund. Bennett stared at the table when the name was spoken. Lenora placed a copy of the account statement in front of everyone. Deposits made from my salary, my bonuses, and the small inheritance my grandmother left me. Withdrawals coded as medical, lease, consulting, and client lodging. Payments that traced to Tessa, Owen, and services connected to the twins' birth. I had not realized how much I was holding in my body until I saw the account printed that way. Hope reduced to line items. Bennett whispered, "I am sorry." I did not look at him. The mediator asked whether I would consider waiving some reimbursement in exchange for a faster settlement. No. The word came out clear and calm. Bennett looked up. I continued. I am not asking for punishment. I am asking for restoration. Those are different. Tessa's attorney tried to argue that Tessa had no knowledge of the source of all funds. Lenora played the voice message where Tessa said Bennett wanted a family more than he wanted me. Then she played a second recording from Ruth's phone, in which Tessa asked about Bennett's fertility history months earlier, and said truth was flexible. The video screen went very still. Even through a webcam, I could see Tessa's attorney realize her client had not told her the full story. By late afternoon, the settlement framework was in place. Bennett would reimburse all marital funds connected to Tessa and the twins, transfer his share of house equity to offset the forged line of credit exposure, indemnify me from business liabilities, and waive any claim to my retirement accounts. He would retain responsibility for any legal claims arising from Ward Pierce Logistics, except those tied to Owen's fraud, where the company pursued recovery. Owen's side agreed to escrow funds pending the company dispute. Tessa agreed, through clenched teeth and attorney pressure, to return $19,000 that had been transferred to her account directly from the Rowan Fund after Bennett labeled it medical support. She cried when she agreed. Not because she was sorry, because for the first time in her life, crying did not reduce the bill. The divorce itself became final 2 months later. On the morning I signed, I woke before sunrise and made coffee for one person again. This time I noticed the quiet. Not emptiness, quiet. There is a difference. Bennett was waiting in the courthouse hallway when it ended. He asked for one more conversation, but I told him the paperwork had already said everything I needed to say. Ruth approached after he left. She did not ask to hug me. She asked whether she could walk with me to my car. Outside, the air was bright and cold, the sort of spring morning that still carried winter in the shade. We crossed the courthouse steps slowly. Ruth stopped beside my car and handed me another envelope. I found this while cleaning Bennett's old storage boxes, she said. It is yours. I should have given it to you without looking, but I looked. I am sorry for that too. Inside was a folded page from my old journal, the page with the names. Rowan was circled in blue ink. Under it, I had written, "If we ever get there." Tessa had not read the name in my house recently. She had taken it years earlier from a box of things Bennett had stored in his mother's garage during our kitchen renovation. Ruth found the page tucked into a binder of Tessa's event designs, besides sketches for a nursery and a list titled, "Names That Sound Like Mara Would Choose." I stood in the parking lot with that page in my hand and felt a fresh flare of anger so clean it almost startled me. Tessa had not stumbled into cruelty. She had curated it. That was the fifth twist, though by then I no longer needed one to stay angry. I only needed it to complete the record. Ruth looked devastated. I did not know she had it. I believe you. That does not make it better. No, I said. It only keeps the blame where it belongs. I added the page to my file, not for court. The divorce was done. The main settlement was complete. I kept it for myself because sometimes healing requires proof that you did not imagine the precision of someone else's harm. People often ask why I did not confront Tessa one more time. The answer is simple. She would have turned even that into a stage. I was finished performing in her story. The aftermath did not arrive like a single dramatic punishment. It arrived in installments. Ward Pierce Logistics survived, but barely. Celia forced a buyout of Owen's shares after the company confirmed he had diverted funds, falsified vendor reimbursements, and used the business to move money connected to Tessa. Owen lost his marriage and the company position that had made him feel untouchable. He was not sent to prison in this version of the story. Real life is rarely that tidy. But he paid restitution, lost clients, sold the boat he bought with stolen money, and discovered that the respect he enjoyed had been rented by other people's trust. Bennett took a smaller role in the restructured company for 1 year, then sold his remaining interest and moved to Wilmington. Ruth told me he found work managing logistics for a nonprofit medical supply program. I did not ask whether he was happier. I hoped he was honest. That seemed like the better wish. Tessa moved in with our parents after the first round of child support hearings. Owen was ordered to support the twins, but their custody dispute became ugly because ugly foundations rarely produce gentle endings. My mother called me twice, asking whether I would consider forgiving Tessa for the sake of the children. I told her forgiveness was not a transportation service that carried people back to Access. My father said I sounded bitter. I asked him whether he had paid back the money Tessa borrowed from him for legal fees. He changed the subject. Our parents eventually learned what I had learned decades earlier. Tessa's emergencies were endless, and sympathy did not pay invoices. They downsized their house the following year. My mother stopped posting quotes about sisters and healing after several relatives began asking careful questions in the comments. I did not celebrate any of it. There is a difference between justice and entertainment. I did not need Tessa to suffer forever. I needed her to stop using my pain as material for her life. I chose to sell the house. Not because I was running from it, but because every room had become a museum of evidence. The kitchen where I found the picture, the hallway where Ruth called, the bedroom where Bennett slept beside me after seeing his sons, the guest room where I kept the files, the bathroom floor where I had once sat with a negative test and convinced myself that if I could just be calmer, better, more grateful, my body might finally cooperate. I bought a smaller place with tall windows and a studio that faced east. The first morning there, sunlight hit the bare floorboards, and nothing in the room belonged to the old life. No shared wedding china, no fertility medication hidden behind vitamins, no drawer full of baby catalogs I pretended not to keep. Just light, boxes, coffee, and a silence that did not accuse me of anything. Tessa sent me one message after the child support ruling. You got what you wanted. I did not answer. What I wanted had been simple. Honesty, loyalty, a marriage where grief did not become a hiding place for betrayal. I did not get that. What I got instead was truth. Truth is not the same as happiness, but it is ground solid enough to build on. Sometimes I think about the twins. Not often, but sometimes. I hope Leo and Rowan grow up loved by people who learn to tell the truth before the truth becomes a weapon in someone else's hand. I hope they never carry the sins of the adults who used them. I hope one day someone tells them that babies are not betrayals. Adults are. As for the name Rowan, I let it go. A name cannot be stolen forever if you stop letting it hold the shape of your grief. One evening, nearly 2 years after the photograph, I found my old journal while unpacking a box in my new office. The page with the name was gone, of course. Ruth had returned it months earlier. But there were other pages. Lists of appointments. Tiny hearts drawn beside hopeful dates. A note I had written to myself after the third loss that said, "Do not become cruel just because this is cruel." I sat with that sentence for a long time. Then I placed the returned Rowan page in a small fire bowl on the patio. I watched the paper curl into flame, the ink darkening before it vanished. I did not say goodbye to a child. I said goodbye to the version of myself who believed love required silent suffering. I kept the ashes in the bowl until morning, then scattered them into the soil beneath a young dogwood tree outside my new office window. The tree bloomed the next spring. Not dramatically, not like a movie. Just a few white flowers, quiet and stubborn, opening because that is what living things do when the season changes. If you are listening to this and carrying blame that someone else handed you, please hear me clearly. The body you blamed, the heart you questioned, the years you replayed, the apologies you offered to people who knew more than they admitted, none of that makes you foolish. It makes you human. Trusting people you love is not a character flaw. Their decision to exploit that trust is the flaw. My husband had an affair with my sister. My sister had twins, and let him believe they were his. His mother exposed the truth that should have been spoken years earlier. But the final truth was not medical, legal, or financial. The final truth was that I did not have to stay inside a story just because other people had spent years writing me as the guilty one. I left, not because I stopped loving all at once. I left because love without honesty becomes another room where you are expected to disappear. And I was done disappearing. If you've ever discovered that the truth everyone blamed you for was never yours in the first place, tell me this in the comments. What was the first thing you did for yourself after you stopped carrying someone else's lie? Thank you for staying with this story until the end. Everything here is fictional and created for dramatic storytelling and reflection. But the lesson is real. Proof matters, boundaries matter. And no one who benefits from your silence gets to decide when you are allowed to speak.